Okay, welcome to another video. Now before we jump straight into it of today's distribution, you might have noticed it's been a little while now since we've last uploaded a new video to the channel. Now some of you know the reason why, but for those of you who don't, I'm currently in the process of moving to a new house in a new area, and the whole process is just proving to be far more stressful and taking a lot longer than I'd originally anticipated. So I spent a lot of my time dealing with that and haven't had a lot of time to just sit down to record and edit videos. But fingers crossed, we're getting towards the end of that process now, so I can get back to regularly scheduled uploads. With that being said, during my time away, Ubuntu 21.10 and all of its flavours have now been officially released. And as you know, my favourite flavour out of all of the Ubuntus is their Budgie flavour. So I think we can spend a little bit of time today checking out the new version of Ubuntu Budgie 21.10. For those of you who are considering installing this on your own machines, do bear in mind this is not a long-term support release with a number of years support. It's a short-term release with only 9 months of support. So for 21.10, the Ubuntu Budgie team have mainly focused on their window management system called Shuffler, which really is the primary focus of this release. We'll spend a fair bit of time going through that and seeing how it all works with the new features in 21.10. The Budgie desktop has now been uplifted to version 10.5.3 and they have a brand new Windows 11-like layout, which should tie in nicely with the new features of the Windows Shuffler. The desktop has been refreshed and they now sport a revamped dark theme with GTK4 support. The Windows Shuffler now auto moves and arranges windows, and the Shuffler now also comes with its own applet which will reside in one of your panels, and as you can see in the screenshot just there, it's kind of like Windows-esque with the new way that they can snap windows, so that will work quite well in the Windows 11 layout, but we'll be checking all that out once we are fully installed. And it also now includes window rules, and they've got an explanation there, so I'll leave a link to all of this in the description below. And the Shuffler window rule now allows you to open application windows on specific workspaces. And then we have some other small changes for things like the application menu. So the calculator will now show a visual hint of how to copy the result to the clipboard. The transition from the grid to list mode now has a fade rather than a slide animation. They no longer install the elementary G setting schema, and they've added a setting so you can adjust the category spacing in the category view when you're in the application menu. There's also been some updates and changes made to some of the Budgie applets, and they've also introduced a new applet called CPU temp, which will display a CPU temperature sensor on your panel like in this image right here. There's a lot of other sort of bug fixes and cleanups. And of course, now that we are on Ubuntu 21.10, it will have GNOME 40 support. And as we know, Budgie is quite tightly integrated with the GNOME stack. And then there's a nice list of a fair few quality of life improvements. So far as kind of user-facing new features, it's mainly going to be the Windows Shuffler and of course the new Windows 11-like layout, which we'll definitely spend a fair bit of time checking out. So it's available to download right now, and it's quite a large ISO size of around about 3 GB. With all that being said, let's jump into the live environment and get this installed. Right, so here we are in the live environment. Now, as always, we are going to be installing natively, but for those of you who do like to skip the installation parts of these videos, there'll be timestamps down below which will take you straight to the installed desktop. So it uses the standard Ubuntu installer, which I'm sure we are all very familiar with. So first things up, let's choose our language. And then the next step is going to choose our keyboard layout, which for me is UK, and we're just going to use the box just beneath it to make sure it's all working before we go to the next step. So for updates and other software, when I'm usually setting up my own machines, I go for a minimal installation, which just includes things like a web browser and basic utilities. But as we're checking out a new distribution in its entirety, we'll go for the full fat normal installation, which includes everything from things such as your web browser, office software, games, media players, and all of that good stuff. And I am also going to install third-party software and continue. So for the installation type, we have two options here, which are erase disk and install Ubuntu Budgie with the default partition layout, which will be 2 partitions, one for your EFI, and then the rest is all going to be assigned to your root partition using the ext4 file system. And Ubuntu tends to just make you a swap file these days as opposed to a swap partition. Now for anything else, you can go into something else and manually create the partitions yourselves. We're going to go ahead and stick with the default erase disk and install Ubuntu. So there's our 2 partitions, and we'll write those changes to disk and get to the next step. Where am I? London is about right, for now at least. Continue. Okay, user account time. We'll keep it super simple and call this one Budgie Boy. Type in a password. And we won't log in automatically, that way we can have a quick look at the login screen before we jump straight to the desktop. So that's everything, super simple. I'll pause the video here and come back once it's finished. And there we go, so the installation has complete without any issues whatsoever. And we can now reboot and check out our freshly installed Ubuntu Budgie 21.10. And here we are, our login screen. So I do actually quite like the nice and simple look that they go for, with a nice bit of transparency in the top bar as well as the user selection. And for the most part, it's just going to inherit whatever your desktop wallpaper is, with that being said, let's jump straight into it. And here we are. I actually do really like the default look and feel of the Budgie desktop on Ubuntu, but we'll go into all of that in just a moment. Now, first up, we're going to jump into the About section just to confirm the versions of things that we have launched with. So the OS name is, of course, Ubuntu 21.10. The GNOME version that's kind of underpinning all of this is version 40.4.0, and the windowing system is still X11 by default. Now, before we go through the welcome screen and start setting things up for a first time user, I'm sure a lot of you have read that for Ubuntu 21.10 they are transitioning away from the standard .dev package of Firefox and replacing it with the Snap version. Now, Budgie itself hasn't actually launched with the Snap versions. If you go and open up a terminal and type in Snap list, you'll notice that the only snaps that we do have there are Core 20, Snapd, and then the Ubuntu Budgie welcome screen itself. So if we go in and open up Firefox, you'll notice it all work absolutely fine and it'll pull in the default dark theming without any issues whatsoever. Now, as you can see down at the bottom here, we do have a notifier letting us know that there's an update ready to grab. If we go into details of updates, you'll notice that all it says here is Ubuntu Budgie base. But interestingly, if you go into updates and extras here, so let's close this one off first and go into updates and extras via the welcome screen, you'll notice that it will actually go ahead and remove the dev package of Firefox and replace it with the Snap version. So as you can see now, this time it doesn't just say the Ubuntu Budgie base, it also says duplicate packages to be removed, and then it's going to be Firefox. Now, this isn't a huge issue and they do have their reasons as of why they're doing that. However, I don't think it's great for the first time user coming over to sort of Linux or Ubuntu, not knowing quite what's going on, and they've used Firefox the first time and just opened it the first time they've installed their machine, and they've noticed it's all running absolutely fine, it's loading quickly, it's using the correct theme, and then they go ahead and update and don't pay too much attention to what's happening here. And I'm going to imagine the Snap package isn't going to as easily inherit all of the sort of things that the native one does with the correct theming and things like that. So we'll check that out in just a moment. I just do think it should be something made more apparent to a new user so they're not a bit confused why their Firefox package isn't behaving the way it was before they did the updates. Let's go ahead and do an install now. Right, so we're all up to date and should be good to go. And as you can see, it's removed the Firefox quick launch from our dock at the bottom here. So if we open up our application launcher and just type in Firefox, we'll have just the one result. And this time it's going to take a little bit longer to launch for the first time, and it's not going to have the correct dark theme by default. And there we are, that is the Snap version of Firefox, and as you can see there, it is indeed using the light theme and hasn't pulled in the correct system theme that we are currently using, which is the dark variation. Not the end of the world, and I'm sure it's all very easily resolved. I do just think they could do a better job making it a bit of a smoother transition that's less confusing to a new user. Now, before we go through things and make any changes to our system, let's see if we have htop installed so we can do a quick reboot and see how much RAM we're using on a fresh boot. And we do indeed have htop installed, and as you can see there, just beneath that we have a SOP file of 2 GB. So let's reboot and see how much RAM this is using. Right, so we're back off a fresh boot, and as you can see from the output of htop, the RAM usage really isn't so bad whatsoever, especially when you consider this is a fully fledged full desktop distribution, and it's using just over 750 at 751 MB. Now, for those of you who aren't super familiar with Ubuntu Budgie, we'll have a very brief quick run through and overview of the desktop of how everything works, but we won't spend too much time on here as I have done quite a few videos of Ubuntu Budgie in the past. But super simple stuff. Your default desktop layout is going to have a single panel at the top and a dock at the bottom, kind of like a sort of Mac OS kind of layout. Now, your top panel is a standard Budgie panel, which can all be controlled in the Budgie desktop settings, which we'll go into in just a moment. But by default, it's going to house your application launcher to the very left, which can of course be triggered with your left super key. And by default, it's going to spread all of your categories, all of your applications across multiple pages. And then you can also view it by a category with the categories to the left. And your search bar will remain at the top no matter what view you are in, unless you change your desktop layout. It will then move the search bar to the bottom, and it will also add a few extra buttons that aren't there at the moment. We then have a load of clear space, and then in the middle we have our clock, and all of these can be repositioned and rearranged via the Budgie desktop settings. Now towards the right we have a few kind of indicators and system tray sort of settings here. So this first one is your kind of desktop indicator, so your workspace switcher. And by default on Budgie, if you use Control, Alt and then left and right, that is how you're going to change your virtual desktop or your workspace. If we open up an application, you'll see it's got a nice, smooth, fluid kind of sliding transition. And of course, Nemo is your default file manager on Ubuntu Budgie. We have a few more indicators here. This one here is going to be a quick note to quickly jot down any notes you have. You've got places, notifications, and all of that good stuff. And we have Bluetooth. We'll make sure that's all working without any issues in just a moment. And then we have our power button, and then we have our Raven trigger, which by default will open up on the right side of your screen. And here you'll find things like a little calendar applet, music, and you'll also get a little music widget which will let you pause and skip tracks and all of that good stuff. And here you can also get your notifications. Now you can manually change the side of the screen that opens up on, but by default it's going to be set to automatic, and it will change depending on what desktop layout you are on. I think the Unity one will open it up on the left hand side of the screen, but we'll double check that in just a moment. Now moving towards the bottom of our screen, we have our dock, which is an application called Plank. So it's transparent theming by default with icon zoom. And if you hold control and then press the right button, you can go into preferences and then mess around with the theming and the size and all of that good stuff. And by default, they only have a couple of sort of default themes on here, which are default, GTK plus, matte and transparent. Now for your settings, it can be a little bit confusing because they have two kind of packages where you're going to manage most of your settings. So here we have the Budgie desktop settings. And if you type in settings, you'll see that we also have another application called settings, which is using the same icon theme as the Budgie desktop settings. So as this is quite tightly integrated with the GNOME stack, you'll find that most of the system settings are going to be controlled via GNOME's control center. And then most of your desktop settings are going to be controlled via the Budgie desktop settings. So think of it as desktop settings, system settings. And in your application launcher, it's not just going to show your applications. You can also search for specific sort of settings categories inside GNOME's control center. So for example, if we type in display, we can see that it's gone ahead and found the screen display section in GNOME control center, or the GNOME settings, which is going to be your system settings, and then it will open it up directly on that sort of part of the settings. And here we are in the screen display, where you can do things like fractional scaling and all of that good stuff. Now for Budgie desktop settings, here you can really do quite a lot, and it's really quite good for the Budgie desktop sort of configuration to really change a lot of aspects of the way your desktop works. And I think Budgie probably does it better than a lot of other desktop environments out there. So with a lot of other desktop environments, let's say KDE or Cinnamon or something like that, a lot of the settings are kind of placed intermittently around different kind of settings or applications, whereas Budgie desktop settings has everything here. So if you want to change your theming, you can go in here for your widgets and icons, which by default are Pocolo Dark and Pocolo. And as you can see in the title bar here, it's quite large, and they also have the slim or compact versions of those themings to make it a little bit slimmer on your title bar. You can also change your desktop settings, fonts and Raven, and here is where I said you can change the position of your Raven trigger. So say we want it on the left hand side, and I'll press that button, you'll notice it's now opened up on the left, and we can now also see the little music widget that my face was covering up. But let's leave it on automatic and keep it going. We then have some Windows settings here, and then we have top panel. So this is the whole paneling system, and you can create new ones. And then with each panel, you have 2 pages here of applets and settings. And if we go into settings, you can see that the transparency is set to dynamic, which is my favorite way. And it was recently introduced into sort of the default KDE as well. So as you can see, when nothing's really sort of interacting with the panel, it's going to be a nice transparent kind of shade and look quite nice with the entire sort of desktop theme. And then say you're working on something and you want it to be maximized, but you don't want to be distracted by any sort of flashy transparent effects going on at your top bar, you can leave it set to dynamic, and then every time a window interacts with it, it's going to go into a solid color, and it'll be the same for things like your Raven trigger, etc. Now let's go back into the applets. So there are quite a lot of applets that you can actually use, and one that I do use the most is the global menu, and there are some desktop layouts that have that by default. And we'll go through some of the applets in just a moment, but just as a quick little run through, you can just click one, add it. So let's say we wanted caffeine, we'd add that applet, and then by default, in the default layout, it's going to go into the center part, and you can just select it, and then you can use these arrows to move the applet to anywhere you want it to go. Now that we've given you a brief kind of overview of how the desktop works and sort of all of the sort of default configurations, let's go into some of the new settings and jump into the Budgie welcome screen. Now the actual welcome screen for Ubuntu Budgie is more than just a simple welcome screen to kind of introduce you to your desktop. There are a lot of settings and things that you can do from here, which is quite useful, especially for a new user. So we know that we have snap support built in out of the box, but you won't find Flatpak is enabled or installed out of the box. So what you can do is go straight into recommendations, and as you can see, if we scroll down just a little bit, you can then get a nice GUI kind of guide to go through and install Flatpak as well, which is very handy, especially for someone who's not super familiar with how all of this works. Now, what we are going to do is go into install software, and then you can see we have a few more options here, but the main one that I quite like is the Budgie Extras, which can really sort of extend and expand the usability of your desktop. So if we go into Budgie Extras, there's quite a lot to choose from, and a lot of them will already be installed. So if we just have a quick scroll down, you can have a little look at all of the ways you can extend your desktop. And one of my favourites that as it is included out of the box is the global menu, which we'll go into in just a moment. We're in a different desktop theme. But all of these are a very simple way to install. You just hit the install button and away you go. Now what we want to do is spend a bit of time going through the themes and layouts, because they've got the new desktop theme. We won't go through all of them. We're just going to choose a couple and spend a fair bit of time on the new Windows 11 layout. So with this button here, we can go to themes and layouts, and that's going to give you two sections, which are switch appearance and desktop layout. So there's quite a few sort of desktop themes that you can go ahead and very easily do a one-click install. And one of the newest ones that they introduced in the previous version of Ubuntu Budgie was the sort of White Sir macOS kind of theme, for those of you who like your desktops to sort of look macOS inspired. We won't go ahead and show that off, but in my previous video I think we went quite in sort of depth with all of the other themes that you can do. But what we're going to do is jump straight into it with the desktop layout. And here's what I really do like about Budgie. It's kind of really adaptable to fit your workflow, as opposed to you kind of having to adapt to it. It has a lot of little cool things built into it that you can really just manipulate and sort of configure to how you like to use your system. So as you can see, we have the default Budgie layout. We then have a classic Budgie layout, which for the most part is just going to change the sort of application launcher that you are using. We then have Redmond, so this is like an old Windows style. So let's quickly apply that, and then we'll compare it to the new Windows 11 layout. So it's a very quick process, a single click, and it's going to change the kind of entire way your desktop is laid out. So that's going to give us a single panel at the bottom with an application launcher to the left. And as you can see, like I said at the beginning, it is going to change ever so slightly depending on what desktop layout you are on. So it's now defaulted to the category view, and we have our search and all of these extra buttons that weren't there previously now at the bottom of our application menu. We're going to have a load of clear space, and then back to our system tray on the right, and the Raven trigger will still open up on the right hand side of your screen. And as you can see there, again, for most of them, you're going to find that the panels will always default to being dynamic. So as you can see there, when we maximize the application, our panel has now gone to a solid color. Nice little sort of touch, and I do like to have that as my default kind of way of using panels with maximized applications. And now we have the new one of 11. So if we just have a look at a screenshot, it doesn't appear to actually change too much. We can see the application menu is a little bit different, and of course it has centered our kind of task manager or task list in the middle of the panel. So let's go ahead and apply that and see how that all works. And there we go. It's a super simple stuff, and again, it's going to be a dynamic panel like before, but for the most part nothing has really changed compared to the Redmond one, but apart from now our task list is now center, and the application menu isn't going to be in the category view now. It's going to be in that kind of full sort of application spread across multiple pages, with the search bar and the buttons now back at the bottom of the application launcher itself. So I don't think there's really too much we need to go into for that. So what we will also do is check out my favorite layout that is included, which is the one for all of you old Unity 7 lovers out there. We're just going to press apply layout, and that's going to give us a Unity 7 sort of esque kind of layout. And as you can see, that's changed a few things now. So our title action buttons for things like close, minimize, maximize are now on the left hand side of the application window as opposed to the right. And it's now giving us a 2-panel layout, and these are standard Budgie desktop panels. So again, it's all going to be very nice and dynamic, and we'll also have a global menu there, which will work with most applications but not all. So I know that LibreOffice should work out of the box. Let's go ahead and open up our LibreOffice writer. Let's just close that for now. And then as you can see, all of the settings you can now access from your top bar, which gives you a bit of sort of easy way to see what's going on. It's especially useful for applications like Kdenlive, which I use on a regular basis. And while we've got LibreOffice open, let's make sure our dictionary support is all enabled out of the box for automatic spell check, which it is indeed. Perfect. So let's close that off, and now let's have a quick look at the application launcher now that we're in the Unity layout. Okay, so not too dissimilar from the one I used for a Windows 11, only this time the search bar is back at the top and we don't have those additional buttons. And what you will find now, your Raven trigger should, if it behaves like I remember it to, open up on this side of your screen now as opposed to the right. And there we go. Now next up, we're going to go into the Windows Shuffler and see how that all works now with the sort of tiling and all of that good stuff. But before we do that, just want to see how many packages we do actually have installed out of the box. So for software, you do have your software store here, which is a nice little GUI way to go and install new applications. And while we're here, let's go ahead and grab Synaptic, which is my preferred way as a GUI to manage new application installs on Ubuntu based distributions. Let's go ahead and install that. Right, so now that we've got the Synaptic package manager installed, we have somewhere that I find a lot easier to control my new packages and installations and all of that good stuff. But another cool thing about it is just at the bottom here, it gives you a list of your sort of installed packages and how many you have. So bearing in mind, we have just also installed the Synaptic Package Manager. We can see we have just over 1800 packages installed out of the box on a full normal install. Of course, it'll be a lot lower if you go for the minimal installation. So it is really quite impressive how they've managed to keep the system memory quite low on a fresh boot. Now with that out of the way, let's jump into the thing that I'm most excited about, which is the new Windows Shuffler. And here it is. So the Windows Shuffler control application itself isn't brand new to Ubuntu Budgie. It has been in previous versions. However, it was quite limited, and all of the new sort of cool auto tiling snapping features are new in Ubuntu Budgie 21.10. So by default, it's going to open us up in this tiling view here, where you sort of set the sort of specific regions of your screen for them to tile or snap to. And we do also have some nice kind of default keyboard shortcuts here to do it yourself. And we also have the option to resize and move windows in a custom grid. And then we have layouts again, which you can set up as a custom kind of different layout. So if you go to setup now, add new, you can go ahead and just create a new layout, and then you can add different tasks to it and all of that good stuff. And I do believe they actually have a cool little video explaining how that all works linked in the release notes, so I'll leave all of that in the description below. But for now, let's just press done, and we're going to remove that one for the moment and keep it moving. Okay, we are done, and let's just disable that for now. And the same applies for the Windows rules. I do believe they have some way of explaining that in the release notes. And then we have the applet itself, which I think is what's going to really sort of bring it all together. And it's kind of like that feature in Windows 11 where you can kind of hover over the part of the maximizer and then it will move it to a specific part of your screen. So what we will do is go ahead and add that applet. And then we also have miscellaneous, which is where you can add cool little things like gaps and spaces between the windows. So those of you who are used to things like i3 gaps or other sort of tiling window managers that let you do gaps as well, it's kind of look a little bit like that. So I think first of all, what we're going to go ahead and do is add the applet here so we can manage it straight from within our bottom panel. So we're going to open up Budgie desktop settings, go straight to the bottom panel, and we're just going to press this plus here and then scroll down until we hit the W's, and there we go, a Windows Shuffler. So by default, it's going to add it at the very starting of your panel in this Windows 11 like layout. And then as we can see, it's right there at the bottom left. So it's got a few sort of layouts already there. But as you can see in the applet pop over, if you sort of click it and go over it, you can see that we can keep scrolling through like 9 to 10. So we've got 10 different layouts there. And then as you can see, each time we do that, it's going to change the sort of default ones that we have there that we can switch to. So let's go ahead and put it on a freeway. Let's go for this one here. Okay, so we're not going to add any gaps just yet. We're going to try it all without that and see how this all works. So I haven't actually used this yet, so I'm quite excited to see how it does all come together. Right, so we've opened up 3 different application windows, and now let's play around with the snapping and see how it all works. So we're going to click one to bring it into focus. So let's go for LibreOffice Writer. So we've selected that, so that's the focused application window. And then we're going to go over onto the applet, and we're going to chuck this one straight in the middle of this freeway snap layout. So let's go like so. Okay, let's go ahead and grab this Nemo application window and put that one to the left. And let's now go and select that and smash that over to the right. Okay, cool. So it's very useful. So you could have like a document in the middle that you are working on with kind of like articles in your periphery, so you can see it all at the same time on the one screen. Now we do have some additional buttons here. So this one is going to be for the kind of different layouts that you have. So it's a toggle, so we can go ahead and do that. And then we have this one here, which I think is going to, swap the position and size of the 2 most recently focused windows. Okay, let's give that a go. Nice, so it does really quite easily just shuffle things over. So let's go ahead and press Nemo once more, and let's shuffle that one again and see how that works. Okay, cool, so that's pretty decent. Now let's go ahead and try it with the sort of gaps. So let's go ahead and open up our Shuffler Control application window once more. And now we have margins between virtual grids and screen edges, and then we have window padding, which is going to be the kind of space in between the windows as well. So what we're going to do is chuck a 6. Okay, it doesn't appear to want to take keyboard input, so we do have these arrows on either sides. So we're going to go 6 all the way around, like so. And now we're also going to chuck a 6 in the window padding to keep it equal. So let's minimize that for now. And now let's see if we can just shuffle it once more with this button and see if it will automatically add the gaps for us. It has indeed, so there you go. And as you can see, we have the nice gaps in between the windows and on the screen edges. So now let's try that in a 4-way split. So I've been playing around with the window shuffler control in the applet at the bottom left here for a little while now, for a few minutes, just playing around with different application windows. And for the most part, it's worked absolutely fine. And it's a cool little feature I'm very happy to play around with. I have found it can be a little bit temperamental though with certain application windows, especially for the sort of swapping over and auto snapping. So what I've gone and done, I've opened 4 of the exact same application windows, so we should have no issues really now. So we were in the 4-way view, which is this one right here. So it's not quite the same as the one where it equally distributes it in each corner. This time the applications that are on the left are going to be a bit wider than the applications on the right. And I just want to make sure it is sort of transitioning them over with no issues whatsoever. So let's select this window here. And we're going to press this little swap button and just make sure it is sort of swapping them over without any issues, because I have noticed a bit of a randomness of where it actually wants to put them sometimes. Okay, so for the most part it does seem to be working, so I am quite happy with the way this sort of window shuffling is working. Like I say though, with my limited time with it, I have run into the odd time where it just didn't quite know what it was sort of supposed to be doing with the application windows, but all in all, very cool. Now, as far as default applications, Budgie does come with quite a decent selection of applications installed out of the box, which should be enough for most users to get up and off their feet. Now, we won't spend too much time going through all of them, because I don't think anything's really changed here since the last time we checked out Budgie. But for those of you who have not really used it before, we have 28, we have Solitaire, we have an archive manager, we then have the backup tool, which is going to be Deja Duck, which is a very handy and easy to use backup tool. Can do cool things like over network storage and cloud storage and all of that good stuff. We then have the Budgie Almond Pi, which is a cool little tweak tool for when you're using Ubuntu Budgie on your Raspberry Pis. And that's something really cool about Budgie as well, that they do actually package up a nice ISO to work specifically on the Raspberry Pi. And then one of my favourite Budgie applications, which is of course the Budgie desktop settings, which we spent a fair bit of time on. But while we're here, let me just quickly jump to the bottom panel and see the new setting for the app menu for when you want to adjust the category spacing. There we go, so it's right down there. So when your application menu is in the category list kind of view, and it just looks a bit weird on a different kind of desktop layout or theme, we can go ahead and sort of set custom spacing for the category there to make it look a bit more uniformed and consistent. And then we have some simple applications like Calculator Calendar. Celluloid is going to be your media player for things like video files. Cheese for webcams. Disks is going to be GNOME Disks, a simple application to manage different partitions. Disk usage, document viewer and scanner. Files is Nemo, Firefox web browser, and like I mentioned, we are now using the Snap version. GFarm image viewer, language support, the full LibreOffice suite, Magnus, which is a screen magnifier, Mahjong, maps, Mine's another game, Onboard is your on-screen keyboard, Plank is the dock at the bottom when we're using different desktop layouts that utilise a dock at the bottom, Rhythm Box for music, GNOME settings or control center, software store, Synaptic we installed ourselves, we have Sudoku out of the box, and then we have our text editor, Thunderbird Mail for your sort of default desktop email client, Tilix is your terminal emulator, and then we have Transmission for torrents, and of course the Windows Shuffler control. So a pretty decent selection of different applications out of the box there. Now what I want to do, as we are on the laptop, I'm going to go ahead and just play around with a few different Bluetooth devices for 20 or so minutes off camera and see if we get any issues before we wrap things up. Right, so for the last 15, nearly 20 minutes or so, I've been playing around with a couple different Bluetooth devices, mainly just a pair of headphones and a mouse. And of course, all of your Bluetooth devices are going to be set up and managed through the GNOME Control Center. But all in all, the performance has been absolutely fine. Each device connected without any issues whatsoever. And during the time I was using them, I didn't get any kind of like stutters, freezes or any drop connections. So all in all, no complaints there for the Bluetooth performance. So I think that's where I'm going to wrap up with my refresh look of Ubuntu Budgie, this time featuring the newest version of 21.10. Now all in all, I think we covered the main points in the release notes of the new features, which were the Windows 11 layout and the new features added to the Windows Shuffler control. And all in all, I really do quite like both features. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Windows-like layouts, but I do think it's good to have another option there for users coming over that do want to have something that feels familiar to them, but don't want to do too much of the hard work to set it up themselves. So it's cool that that's added straight into the themes and layouts, and there's easy sort of one click to switch over to it. But the shining sort of feature in this new release is, of course, the shuffler control, along with the new applet to help you auto snap and move things around and all of that good stuff. I will say, There were moments where it was a little bit temperamental with certain application windows for me, but it's all very new, and I'm sure it'll get further refined down the point and be a very sort of capable program. Now, it's not something on the level that you'd put like a pop shelf for the GNOME desktop environment, but there's no reason why it couldn't get there with further improvements down the line. And it's one of those applications where the more you use it, the more usable and sort of feature rich it will become, with the sort of custom layouts and then Windows rules and all of that good stuff. Now, as sort of Ubuntu as a whole, I've been seeing quite a lot about this release not being the sort of most exciting release, and I think that's probably fair to say from what I've seen so far. But I think Ubuntu Budgie always does a good job of at least trying to introduce some new features in each release. So it's not the biggest release we've ever seen from Ubuntu and most of the flavours, but out of all of them, I do think Ubuntu Budgie is probably one this round that has the most to offer as far as sort of new ways to use your desktop. But all in all, that's been Ubuntu Budgie 21.10. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe, and if you've really enjoyed it, you can support me on Patreon. Join the Discord, there's a link in the description below, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.